If we could start the broadcast, please, Kevin. Good morning, everyone, to this meeting of the County Council Cabinet. Could I start with apologies for absence, please? Have we any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Humby.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Have we got any declarations of interest? Councillor Heron.
Chairman, it is non-pecuniary interest, and I don't believe it precludes me, but I do want to put on record in regards to the devolution deal, county deal on item 6, that I'm obviously leader of a district council.
Thank you, Councillor Heron. Item 3, confirmation of minutes. Is everyone happy with the minutes? Good. If we can agree that, thank you. Item 4, Chairman's announcements. I've got no specific announcements. Most of the items cover the points I want to make in the agenda itself. So we can move straight on. We have no deputations as such, but I note that we have Councillor House. I can't see Councillor Porter. Yes, I can. And Councillor Todd, who wish to speak in the case of Councillor House on before items 6, 7 and 10, Councillor Porter 7 and 8, and Councillor Todd 8. Have I got that correct? Thank you very much. Let's move straight on then to item 6, recovery from and learning to live with COVID-19. Before we actually discuss that, I just want to make a point following a meeting I had with district leaders and leaders of the unitary councils yesterday. Basically, the part of the report before you in item 6 covers the proposed county deal. And what I've decided to do is to, in the wider interest of residents of Hampshire, bearing in mind that we're having another meeting of the districts and the unitary leaders and chief executives shortly, it makes sense not to consider the content of the prospectus that is included within the papers for COVID-19 until discussions have taken place with the leaders and the chief executives. The reason for that is I had a meeting yesterday, and what I had intended to do originally was to come forward with any amendments based upon that meeting, but it was the view of that meeting yesterday that we needed to to have a further meeting with chief executives for them to come up with any ideas for an improvement to the prospectus itself. So we won't discuss that this morning. We'll leave that for a future cabinet meeting after we've had further meetings with the districts and the unitaries. Now, can I start by asking our Steve Crocker, who is standing in for the chief executive, who I should have said is making a very good recovery from her operation, and I saw her online yesterday, and I'm certain we will be seeing a lot more of her online initially and then back with us within weeks. Steve, would you like to give the report on the lessons we're learning to recovery and learning to live with COVID-19?
Thank you, Leader. So this is the 8th in a series of reports that we've done to Cabinet summarising our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and as the report states, we've now switched to recovery and learning to live with the impacts of COVID. I'll take you through it in very short order, and there are a number of directors that can answer detailed questions if they should arise with regards to the COVID aspects of this. Inevitably, with writing a report of this nature, the minute one puts pen to paper or key to keypad or whatever the phrase is these days, it becomes out of date. So, school attendance varies from day to day, for example, and also staffing absence and returns vary from day to day. Probably the major change in the report is that it impacts the economic, it outlines the economic impact in Hampshire. That's becoming clearer as we go forward. And then the report also gives you some service by service breakdown of what's happening in our public services in Hampshire. So starting with economic recovery, and probably the most relevant paragraph that I can point you to on this one is the summary in paragraph 27, which says quite clearly, in short, the impact of the pandemic has been enormous, but following the gradual reopening of the economy, the headline and economic labour market indicators suggested a strong recovery was underway in the second quarter. So that's really helpful to have that understanding, I think. Moving on to the rates of infection, you can see that broken down in sections 35 onwards, and in terms of the COVID work programmes from 40 onwards, and including track and trace, etc. And also we talk in the paper about the progress against vaccination from 46 onwards. I won't add to that what's written down because I think it's fairly clear. Colleagues from Adults Health and Care have set out the issues in their services, and clearly one of the issues there is around the requirement for care staff to be vaccinated, and you'll see in section 49 where that leaves us, around 6% of the total staff in the sector needing to be vaccinated. I'm informed that that's a relatively good position compared with many areas of the country. There are a number of grants that we've been able to put out into the sector to keep things going, but obviously the main thing continues to be the pressing issues around staffing, not necessarily about vaccination, but just around maintaining high levels and appropriate levels of staffing, combination of the diminished labour market and some attrition there. Connected to this tangentially, but it's referred to in the report in section 54 as the receipt of Afghan refugees into Hampshire, and a range of services, including services in children's services, but adults as well, have been mobilised to help and support those families as they've arrived, and they're being prepared for longer term rehousing in various parts of the country, but including Hampshire. In terms of children's, you'll be aware that the children are all back at school, and that there are still, as you'd expect, cases being reported in schools. We think about 1% of children at the moment are reporting COVID, and our attendance rates in Hampshire, both at primary and secondary, are above the national average, which is really positive, but the national average and our local average is down on pre-COVID levels in terms of attendance. So there's some work to do there, and there's clearly some anxiety around in the system for parents, and that's completely understandable. We continue to support the early years childcare sector, and also it should be noted that referrals into children's social care are very significantly higher than pre-pandemic. They're about 20% above average for the pre-COVID period. That's a lot of professional anxiety around children. The report sets out the response in our culture, communities and business sector, and we've seen a significant increase in the numbers of visitors to country parks, and I think that's really positive, but also pressures in the registration service and so on. Colleagues in Economy, Transport, Environment report that travel journeys continue to recover, and that the highway service has maintained its work over the pandemic period. Finally, moving on to returning to work, you'll see that corporate services have talked in the report about how we've managed that return. You'll have seen today, I'm sure, members, that as you come in, the cafe is quite a good temperature check, and there's lots of people in the cafe, and we're beginning to get that hum back in terms of people being in on a regular basis, but also taking advantage of the flexibilities that we've been able to afford. So that feels like we're beginning to strike the right balance as we go forward. And finally, in the report, we just set out some of the communications activity that we've carried out in order to encourage people to take up vaccines and to ensure that they get tested, etc. That's my overview, Leader, of this report. I'm very happy to take questions, and also my colleagues are here to answer any questions that you might you or other members may wish to.
Thank you, Steve. Before we actually take questions, I'd like to ask Councillor House if he'd like to say a few words at this stage.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My comments are actually on the County Deal section of the report, which has been published and therefore is in the public domain. I recognise the comments you've made just a while ago about effectively deferring this. I take it that that's formally not going to be a recommendation of any kind to note the paper this morning.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. But I would just make a few comments in the round from the perspective of maybe where the County Council could go forward on this, just to help inform that debate from that perspective. We don't yet know if the government is offering decentralisation or devolution at this stage, or anything much more than limited one-off funding. But it must be right that in principle we look to see what's on offer through the description of a county deal as potentially game-changing, it says in the report. I'm not quite sure that's that might be a bit of a stretch, but let's see. If we look at what's been allowed in other deals, which were mistakenly called devolution deals, they weren't devolution deals, there was almost no devolution attached to them, just a bit of decentralisation and modest amounts of capital funding. The problem I have at the moment, Chairman, and maybe this is picked up by your earlier comments, is that other than leaks, we don't have the faintest clue what the government is really offering, and just as importantly, what they expect from us in return. The ask from government is likely to be at least as great as what we might get from government, and will almost certainly be to expect a large expansion of house building over and above that in local plans, and who knows what else, maybe even road pricing to fund new infrastructure. Because that was the sort of backdrop and context of the earlier deals that were floated in the last Parliament. So we should proceed with some caution. And I think there are three areas that we do need to be clear on, and where the document that has been published is at least ambiguous. The first is who's in the deal. It's essentially a county council document at the moment. There's been limited liaison with districts, but there certainly hasn't been a genuine partnership. I recognise that may now be changing, and I welcome that, and I think hopefully yesterday's meeting helped in that process. The second is what's in the deal, and the prospectus does start on that journey, but it's got a very long way to go. How serious are we about health commissioning, for example, to join up social care and housing? What are we really saying about skills, further education and transport? Are we interested in repatriating LEP powers and the funding that goes with them to achieve local accountability? What about all these government quangos nationally that set out large areas of priority for spending, whether that's National Highways, Homes England, the Environment Agency, Natural England, Sport England, it goes on. Are we ambitious to broaden our tax base and powers to achieve fundamental financial independence from government? That really would be game-changing if we could achieve some of those things. And the document is, at the moment, again, hopefully this will change as time goes by, largely silent on these issues. Finally, Chairman, we really do need to address governance. It's a bit of an elephant in the room at the moment. The appearance from briefings from civil servants is what the real agenda from government is about wanting a single point of contact. Someone that civil servants or the Prime Minister can pick up the phone to and say, this is Hampshire, and wider Hampshire, Pan Hampshire, including Southampton, Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. And it was likely that it was the imposition of a mayoral deal and a mayoral model that killed the last version of this a few years ago. We're told that may not now be a requirement. We'll wait to see what the white paper really says. Yet reducing democracy and accountability does seem to be part of the agenda here through the removal of annual elections for those places that have them. And perhaps limiting what could be achieved through a joint committee if that was actually on offer. Governance is critical, it is a key issue, and it can't be left until last. And the appearance so far, Chairman, was that what was happening. It's a process that really does have to start now. Again, if that is now happening, I think that's really important. Various players in these debates around the county and across the country in the past have said we actually want these things to work, but they've got to be true partnerships. They've got to be genuine partnerships, partnerships of equals. And we can't risk a half-baked scheme, which could well be what's likely to be on offer from government. So I welcome the fact that we've paused temporarily the process today on this, Chairman. I hope we genuinely can have a partnership across all of the county, involving Southampton, Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight, maybe other agencies as well, and do something which is genuinely radical, genuinely progressive, repatriates powers to local government in a way that we haven't seen for generations in what is the most centralised country in the west of Europe. Thank you, Chairman.
Without, Councillor House, without wishing to damage your credentials as a Liberal Democrat, can I say the last statement you made, I entirely agree with. That is my aim, has been my aim from the start, is to actually try to find a way of having genuine devolution, not local government reorganisation, devolution. Because as you pointed out, we have one of the most centralised states in the Western world. And it has to be genuine devolution, where we have some control over how we spend the money given to us, rather than an agency agreement with various targets attached to it. So from that point of view, I would sincerely hope that we can work in partnership. Clearly, I took the view initially, and I still do, that it was right to engage. It was right to find out exactly what the government wanted out of us. We are still not at that stage, as you've rightly pointed out, partly because I think there's been, because of the change in Secretary of State, there's probably less certainty at the centre than there perhaps was a month or so ago. But nonetheless, I thought it was important that we engage with the government just to see what's on offer, to see whether it was something that we'd be interested in. And we're now at the stage where we will be engaging quite fully with the districts and the unitaries. Although I have to say we have been engaging with them in the past in terms of asking them for information and indeed taking that into account with the initial report we produced. So thank you for that. Let's move on with comments from my Cabinet colleagues on the content of the recovery and learning to live with COVID. And I do stress it's about that rather than about the county deal, which, as I say, we will discuss at a future occasion. And I'm also conscious that Simon Bryant, the Director of Public Health, would probably want to say a few words. Do you want to say that now or just to answer questions, Simon?
I'm happy either way. Just as Steve said, there's a lot of data in the paper. If I just give the latest figures, that's probably the easiest thing to do. And then we've got a local engagement board fairly shortly after Cabinet, so we can go into more detail there. So if I just give the latest figures, so for Hampshire, our 7-day rate for all ages is 384.1, so that's new cases. However, when you look at the over 60s, that rate's much lower at 114. So that does show that the vaccination has broken, not completely, that link between illness and hospitalisation and mortality. But we are seeing a lot of cases, as Steve said, in the younger age group, and that's the age group that's most affected, the 10 to 14s. I'll give more details on the local outbreak engagement board later on, Leader.
Thank you, Simon. Comments from my colleagues. Councillor Warwick.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Simon, I'm really interested in this paper, and particularly the uptake of the booster vaccine, along with combining it with the flu jab. Do you have any data as yet on how that uptake is going? Are people by and large going for the combination? I guess the over 50s is the age group we're targeting of both injections.
So that data is very new, so the programs have just started, so we haven't got that data, but we are monitoring it. At the minute, the flu program started earlier, so we're seeing uptake of that, and we need to keep promoting that. And then the COVID booster has followed and is a little bit slower to start, but it is now in train and moving forward alongside the schools program, which is a complex program.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question, I think, to Steve, who touched on it in his opening remarks, and it's about paragraph 67. And that's talking about the increased number of child protection plans, although that's starting to reduce. And I suppose the critical question is, do we believe that this is a blip or a step change? And if we can't tell yet, how are we going to form that view? Because a step change would have dramatic impacts on our budget.
So I'll unpack that a little bit. So I think what is looking like a step change, it is the number of referrals into children's social care. So that has been now consistent for 6 months, possibly a bit longer, in being more than 20% above its pre-pandemic rate. So that feels like 6 months of consistently higher rates feels like a step change. And what we know about previous, previous national incidents like Baby P is that that creates a local step change, and it never goes back to the previous level. That's what history tells us. It always maintains at that high level. So that looks like it might well be a significant increase in our activity. The slightly more positive news about that is the way I describe it is that we've got a lot of understandable and correct in many ways professional anxiety around children. So professionals are referring into us. When we go out and assess, actually, and we haven't changed our thresholds at all, actually we're saying most of that anxiety is manageable, and we haven't seen a major increase in our case holding apart from at that assessment stage. So actually, mostly those cases are able to be held by the family with some support through early help quite often. But families are mostly managing. But it's about professional anxiety at this stage. We haven't seen, though we've had and I would describe the child protection numbers as a blip. So we've seen an increase, but that is coming down, and that is beginning to consistently come down. So two different answers to do two different bits of the system, I'm afraid. So it's never straightforward with us. But it is the case that there's been a sustained increase in referrals.
And a referral costs us money, Leader, because we have to look at the issue and assess it and make decisions. And if there is a step change, I was wondering what the mechanism would be for bringing that to attention of the government with a view to them helping us financially to cope with that step change, because I think if we've seen it, other counties will see it, and that referral would be useful.
I can assure you that I've now got roots through the Association of Directors of Children's Services, and we've made this case very, very strongly in terms of the need for the government to look at the funding for children's social care going forward, because this issue is unlikely to go away. So that case has definitely been made to both senior civil servants and ministers.
Yeah, that's great. So through the professional network, good. But do we want, as Hampshire, to make that point as well?
We have made a very similar point, Steve, on a number of occasions about the full cost of the extra burden upon us being met by funding from central government. And we will continue to do so at every opportunity. Any other comments on the report? Councillor Heron.
Chairman, it's more of a question again back to Simon. Just we've asked about how take-up's going on the booster vaccination for older persons. It mentioned in paragraph 47, but do we have any data on how the take-up's going for the 12 to 16-year-olds, and what messaging, if any, are we putting out on that? Certainly, Chairman, as a parent of one who's on that, I think it was a difficult decision to make, to be honest, and obviously we chose to have the vaccination, but I just wonder what support we're giving the parents out there so that they have the right information.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Heron. Yes, we're doing a lot of work supporting the NHS in rolling that programme out. It's a complicated programme, as you say. It's not a straightforward issue to unpick. So yes, we are seeing that. It's really complicated to see the actual uptake because we've got outbreaks and people with COVID, so they can't have the vaccination for 28 days until after COVID. But we are seeing good uptake across the board, as we would expect. So we are seeing that rise, and we're seeing young people taking up that offer, and there now will be an offer for those who have missed out for various reasons, either off school. That wasn't announced till yesterday, so now know how to support those people who can't take it up. I'm really pleased with the way it's going. It is difficult with some of the messages we're seeing on the other side, and we're trying to promote this in a really open way that shows the benefit of the vaccination for young people.
Any other comments?
Thanks. I was just also going to reassure Councillor Heron, we're doing a lot of comms on younger people, which you will not see because you're not in the demographic to receive the message. In fact, I don't think anyone in this room will receive the message, but we are targeting them quite with paid posts to get the message through.
I don't know whether that was a backhanded compliment to Councillor Heron or not. I think I'll leave that as an open question. Any other comments? Well, I'd ask you to approve the recommendations, but note that the third recommendation is subject to considering the content of the not considering the content of the prospectus for the county deal until further discussions have taken place with the leaders and chief executives of district, borough and unitary authorities. Kevin, what I might do is write above where I sign sign these decisions, that point, if we can lift that out of the note that I know Rob's got, to show that we've taken account of what's been said yesterday, but nonetheless, we actually included it in the recommendations. Okay? Are you all happy with the recommendations? Fine. Let us move on to item 7. And I've got 2 speakers here before we actually start the discussion itself. And Councillor House, you want to say something on this, and I understand Councillor Porter as well. I don't know which order you like to go in. I leave it up to you.
I always defer to Jackie, Chairman. I also, just for the record, I didn't want to destroy your Conservative credentials either when you agree with me. It's okay. It's
right.
okay. We can cope.
And I'm fully confident about my Conservative credentials, but it's very kind of you to make that point.
I'm always concerned, Chairman.
Councillor Porter, are you starting the ball rolling then?
Yes, I am going to start. Thank you. I'm speaking specifically on children's services budget cuts, as you would expect. And I just wanted to raise a few points about a number of the lines which start on page 251, I think. So the first one is the CSO 7. It's the youth offending team cut, which the County Council makes a contribution to the total. And I think that it's important to recognise that 2020 was a good year in terms of the process of, or the possibilities for people to behave in a criminal manner, because at the beginning of the year, the police certainly said that the amount of criminal behaviour had dropped. And I think that's also reflected in young people. But we also know that young people, the police are increasingly reluctant to criminalise young people, which is a good thing. However, this is a cut which is quite significant as a part of the budget for Hampshire County Council, but I think it would be useful to describe this cut in the context of the total budget for this team across all funding providers. Because if everybody's making the same sort of cuts or even bigger, which we're not party to on this paper, that would be a very serious budget cut. So my question is really on that one is, could we have that in the context of the total budget for that piece of work of going forward? Because if everybody's making a £158,000 cut in it, it's going to be a very significant figure in total. The second one was the Modernising placement programme. And actually it ties in a little bit with what Councillor Reid was just talking about. The Hive foster networks are really practical innovation, and I do hope it retains and attracts the foster carers and presents a more family-like behaviour for the young people that are in their foster care too. I think it's a really positive step and really innovative idea from the team. And we recognise that only a small percentage of young people get to this point. Most of them are on the way towards child protection plans and then into foster care. But I do remain concerned, just as Councillor Reid mentioned, that the high number of children reported to children's services, and in fact I think you've just talked about that point and how you're going to be taking that forward, and I really do applaud that, because we do know that it's unreasonable to expect now the numbers to drop. They have been, despite some work and some very good work from children's services, the number still continues to rise steadily, and we need to reduce the number at the wide end of the funnel somehow. So not just get money from government to accept that we're going to be dealing with more children in children's services, but we need to find ways to reduce the number at the top of the funnel so that our professionals have more confidence in the way in which our children are being looked after by their families. The next point I was going to raise is CS 12, 13 and 20. really that's about, 12 is about making more money out of services to schools, but 13 and 20 are really about looking at taking money off schools through the DSG. And although some schools have done very much better out of the fairer funding, some schools have not done better. And we need to make sure that we're supporting schools, all our schools, to do a good job with the budget they should have. But my prime one is CS17, home to school transport. At the Select Committee, a suggestion was made that lobbying government so that all children are charged to go to school if they need to travel by bus seems to be fundamentally wrong, that there could be some sort of system by which every child that caught a bus would make some contribution to the cost of that. Although rurality isn't a protected characteristic, it should be. Living away from a school must not be a charge on your education. And at the moment, that potentially is a fact, that children are being charged for going to school. So whether they're 4 and they're going, and that is not part of the government's legislation to provide education transport before they are of educational age, but at the moment 4-year-olds in the rural areas are still charged to go to school. And if this process continues, we could be charging everybody to go to school if they live in a rural area, and that has to be wrong. So I just would like to make that point here, and we can perhaps discuss that again later. Instead, I think we should be using buses more widely, in fact, to discourage parents from taking a car and instead put their child onto a bus. There is an opportunity here to look at the carbon savings and working even better with our community and regular bus services. And I realise that some analysis is being done now, but I believe there's much more to do on this. I think it's really important that we work knowing that these, and I raise it again in the carbon footprint later on, knowing that we change travel habits at this point. And by encouraging parents to stick their children in a car, it's not changing travel habits at all. So that section on the budget line, I think, could be used more innovatively. And it's a shame that actually all it is really doing is talking about reducing the number of SMEs that potentially could offer bus services, which ultimately reduces our potential long-term to expand our bus routes, particularly in the rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Keith has.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I was struck when I reread this paper again, following on from the County Deal paper, just what the similarities were in some ways between this paper on budget reductions, which is clearly one led by government, and the paper earlier which touched on the County Deal, which talks about the future. And it really did remind me that the day job of the County Council is not about devolution at the moment. It's about doing what its MPs tell it to do, which is about having few freedoms, which is about hiking up the council tax relentlessly year after year, and about making increasingly severe cuts to public services. And here we are again, the cycle that we have relentlessly every 2 years. Yet the context now is increasingly difficult and different. And we've yet to achieve all the cuts in the 2019 package of cuts, let alone the 21 package of cuts. And this, remarkably looking forward to 2023, still includes over £8 million of cuts this council wanted to make to public health by rebadging existing county council services against the public health budget. I wonder, have we really learned nothing from COVID about the value of public health spending? It seems not. But there is a bit of good news tucked away in this report. Some common sense, abandoning of proposals to make further reductions to household waste recycling centres, when we know that with a climate emergency we need to recycle more, not recycle less, and deciding to abandon plans to potentially sack every school crossing patrol in the county, which would have driven more children to be being driven to school, again, in the context of a climate emergency. But I don't really expect Cabinet today to abandon many further cuts on the plans shown in Appendix 3, although I hope you would. It does, however, make sense now to keep lobbying Hampshire MPs to do what's right and to pressure the Chancellor of the Exchequer for a fair financial settlement to local government in the budget and the spending review at the end of this month, so that these cuts are no longer needed. In the scheme of the nation's finances, these sums of money are pretty small. So I won't run through the details of Appendix 3 today. You'll be delighted to know. I'll make a couple of comments in a moment, but what I would ask Cabinet to resolve today is not merely to recommend things to Council in a few weeks' time, but to resolve today, to write to Hampshire MPs and for the leader to meet with them ahead of the budget and our County Council meeting, and to ask them to lobby the Chancellor to meet the collective demands from local government as set out in the Local Government Association's cross-party submission for the spending review, so the Conservatives have endorsed it, Chairman, to protect and not to further reduce local services. This stuff matters. I've got two nagging worries beyond that high-level point. The first is that we're looking to spend the best part of £1 million tarting up the council chamber, which we barely use as a council, at the same time that we're making long-term cuts. And many of us have found that meeting in this room is far better than meeting in the council chamber. We can see each other clearly. There's nice light, it's airy, it's modern, it's efficient. The sound works now without spending hundreds of thousands of pounds more money. So that's point one. It would be great if Cabinet simply withdrew that today. The second point I want to make now is that the real brunt of some of the cuts here are on vulnerable younger adults. There are some genuine savings, I accept that, so there are some genuine efficiencies and there are some smarter ways of providing some services, as we've argued from the Lib Dems benches over the years, but there are still £9 million of cuts to younger adults with learning disabilities, with mental health and with physical disabilities. That's worrying. We really are scraping the bottom of the barrel with these savings. And two, there's a worrying dependency on volunteers for many services without providing the support and the culture that's needed for a volunteer set of services. We saw this with libraries. You cut them off, you set them free, give them £10,000 and let them sink or swim. That isn't about volunteer management for the long term. It might just work in some middle-class, affluent area libraries. It's not going to work for services for vulnerable people right the way across the county. So, Chairman, please, can I ask you to resolve today to make the case to your MPs, get them to do their job, because that really would be levelling up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, let's move on to the report itself. And am I right in saying that, Steve, are you doing it, or is it Rob? It's Rob, sorry. Rob Carr.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. So obviously the primary purpose of the report is to approve the individual savings proposals and to submit these on to County Council. It does also give a limited update on the medium-term financial strategy, but obviously we can't complete that fully until we get the spending review later in the month. You'll have noticed it is a very long report, so we have structured the executive summary to effectively be a report within a report, and this picks out the key items for your consideration. So a large part of the content of the report is the equality impact assessments, which look at the impact and the mitigations for each of the savings proposals. And you'll be aware that for those proposals where there's a significant impact on service users, they will be subject to separate stage 2 consultations with final decisions made by executive members in due course. So although the primary purpose of the report is the individual savings proposals, you'll see from the recommendations that there is also some new investment proposed. So on the revenue side, this includes an additional £7 million per annum investment in highway maintenance and £3.2 million per annum for intensive workers within children's services. For capital, an investment of £22 million is proposed for younger adults extra care and the purchase of Woodcott Lodge, which is currently being used as a discharge to assess facility. There are also proposals to undertake works to the council chamber. Given the length of the report, I certainly wasn't intending going through it page by page, so that was what I was going to cover this morning. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Looking around my cabinet colleagues, Edward, before I ask you to speak, I'd just like to comment on a couple of things that Councillor House has made, and I'm certain that most of the other points will be covered by my colleagues. Let's start with the council chamber. As I understand it, the main reason for this is to ensure that it can still be used for, I think it's the coroner, that's right. Without it, if we have to provide a coroner with appropriate accommodation. If we didn't use the council chamber, as I understand it, but I'm quite happy to be corrected about this, we'd have to go out outside our own estate to find somewhere. And the information I've received is that would be more expensive than actually bringing the council chamber up to the standard that we need to do for the coroner. In doing so, of course, it improves the council chamber for our own purposes, but that is not the main purpose of the changes. Am I correct in saying that, Rob, about having to go outside the estate if we didn't do something with the council chamber? Now, I'll ask Edward to comment on that, just when I made this other point about lobbying MPs. I, as you know, have arranged monthly meetings with members of Parliament. We were due to have the next one on the 22nd of October, and I then rearranged it for the 29th because that was difficult in terms of the parliamentary calendar. That is also difficult. So if we can't get a meeting face-to-face before the next council meeting, I will certainly be writing to all MPs, as I did last year, to explain to them the importance of ensuring that local funding is of an adequate level to cover the tasks that we've been asked to fulfil. And I'll ask Edward, Councillor Heron, to comment on the council chamber if he wishes to do so, but in the wider context of the other matters.
Chairman, thank you. And it was specifically the council chamber. As I'm sure Council House is aware, the council chamber is actually listed, so whether we're using it or not, or how we're using it, we have to maintain the structure of that and the big. The leader is correct. When we're not using it for council meetings, it is used for the coroner's court, as I'm sure Council House will be aware, particularly over this COVID. That is a period that has been a very challenging environment for families, also with people being able to access that. I would say that the money that's being spent on refurbishing the chamber, making sure that it's fit for purpose and maintains its historic fabric, plus the fact that it is available as a very cost-effective way of having the coroner's court, which, although we have limited control over, we are required to pick the bill up for on behalf of our residents. Actually, I think it represents good value for money. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
I revisited CS07 after Councillor Porter drew our attention to it, and that's the savings in the area of the youth offending team. Now, one of the things that struck me about this appendix is that all of the proposed savings are attached to a commentary as to how we are going to cope with them and the impact that they're going to have. And this one was an extremely reasoned one, because the headline, cuts in the area of youth offending, sounds a bad headline. And yet if you read the commentary, it says, if the impact of youth crime prevention continues to be successful, then the numbers of young people in core youth offending business should be absorbed by the reduced staffing. In other words, there's a strategy here of putting more emphasis on youth crime prevention rather than treating the people who have offended subsequently. And I think if you ask the general public, would you rather see crime prevented or offenders treated, they would go for prevention every time, because it means that the number of crimes is being reduced. So in that context, I think that's an extremely good line. And it comes back to what I said at the last council meeting, and I've said many times, we have to measure what we spend our money on by the outcomes and not simply by the inputs. And if this outcome is one of a reduction in youth crime, then I'm sure everybody around this table would be happy. With regards to the point that Councillor House made about writing to the MPs, and Councillor House has made that point before, earlier on I asked a specific question to Steve Crocker about whether we were having a blip or a step change and what we were doing about it. And what came out of that discussion was that through the professional channels of children's services and through Hampshire County Council, we are bringing specific problems to the attention of the government all the time. I think it is a much more powerful way of getting across our difficulties than simply sitting here and writing a letter saying, please give us more money, love Keith. It's, you know, actually going into the specifics and saying, here's where we're having difficulties, must surely be more powerful. So without disagreeing with the thrust of what Councillor House was saying, I think we are doing it the right way now. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Steve. Ros.
Thank you, Leader. Just to comment on some of Jackie's comments, and thank you for those comments, and to follow on from Councillor Reid with the youth offending team. Yes, we are seeing a reduction in youth offending, but if that does change, that doesn't mean that we won't make the necessary arrangements that we need to make to support that in the future, first of all. In regards to the management placements programme, this is actually a really good example of where actually investing in services leads to a long-term saving, and we can see that from the Transforming Social Care programme that we've done, which shows that a number of the children in our care was reducing pre-pandemic and does remain to this day below the national average. With the proposal for the school budgets, in particular the high needs blocks and budgets such as that, this is really about making sure that that funding matches the right budget against its spend. So it's only right that if the main focus on a placement is education, that actually that education budget is paying for that provision. With regards to the home to school transport as well, I think the main thing that we could that as a department we could really achieve is a local policy that reflects local circumstances, so taking on the rural aspect in some areas and those more urban aspects in other areas, and it's what fits best for those locations. But this one is very much going back to the contractors and seeing having one bus for a number of schools that fits within those specific areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros. Steve, I don't know whether you want to comment about on anything that Councillor Porter said. I was thinking particularly of the school transport issue.
That's you've lit the blue touch paper. I'll try not to go off on one.
Not too long.
No.
We're aware of it.
Councillor Porter knows my views on that. But simply that if we were able to achieve policy on home school transport is set nationally, and it is a blunt instrument. And my personal view is that if we were able to get a local homeschool transport policy, we could adapt it to fit our circumstances in Hampshire. That would be a better deal for all families rather than what we do at the moment. And I made the point at Select Committee that if you live 2.999 miles away from school, you get nothing. And if you live 3.01 miles away from school, you get everything. So it is, there's something there, I think. The other thing, just a factual thing, is in terms of the numbers of children looked after. It's always something we look at. The Association of Directors of Children's Services looked at the last 2 years from 2019 through to the beginning of 21, and there was a 6% increase nationally in the numbers of children looked after. Our figures during that same period were, we started on 1658, 1659 rather, and we are now 1657. So it's we've bucked the trend, and we've done that through our Transforming Social Care programme, and that's delivered long-term savings for us and continues to deliver long-term savings whilst keeping children safely at home. So that's what's the sort of thing we want to do with that MPP programme, which is investing to achieve savings in the long term.
Thank you, Steve. Perhaps I could also add to the point about home to school transport. This is a classic example of something that I believe should be devolved to local councils so that you can align the funding to the need locally rather than have, as Steve rightly pointed out, a blunt instrument nationally, which has, I think, the wrong incentives for individuals, families, and us to spend the money wisely that we have from the council taxpayer. Other comments? Liz Fairhurst.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to take issue with Councillor House, yet again talking about the reduction in the younger adults with learning disabilities. This has been arisen every year for the last 2-3 years at full council, and every year I say the same thing back. We are investing heavily in extra care accommodation for younger adults with learning disabilities to get them out of residential accommodation. Their lives improve immeasurably. They get their freedom, they have independence, they still have care on hand all the time, but it becomes their choice. And Councillor House, I would say to you, rather than raise this again, come with me to visit one of our extra care and just see how much better the lives of these people are, having got them out of residential care. And it saves us money, but it also gives them extra money.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor Forster, Steve Forster.
Thank you, Leader. 2 points, if I may, just to pick up on the refurbishment of the council chamber. I was unfortunate enough to be at an inquest, which took a considerable amount of time. And I speak from experience, personal experience with my family, of what a wonderful location it is, but in serious need of an upgrade. And I think it's really good to see it being brought up. But when the coroner uses it, it is for a very good reason. And sadly, during the COVID crisis, we've seen too much of that. I think it's a wise investment. Moving on to the home to school transport. I think considering home to school transport, as the leader said, as part of a devolution focus is really important, because that would give local areas the opportunity to focus not just on home to school transport, but actually on modal shift, getting people out of their existing transport that often is highly carbon intensive, but actually using more bicycle transport, using demand responsive transport, i.e. a sort of Uber for buses and things like those. That is the area that we should be looking at, not just looking at individual home to school transport or individual bus lines. It's actually a much more holistic view. And I think the sort of thing that we're talking about moving towards, especially if there is a move towards a county deal type operation of more devolved access and more flexibility on a local basis, would give massive benefits.
Thank you, Councillor Forster. Have I got any other comments on this item? Are you all happy then with the recommendations on page 145, 146 and 147? All agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 8, climate change. We've got 2 speakers before we start, Councillor Porter and Councillor Todd. Who's going to be first?
He's sitting down. Okay, thank you very much. This is much quicker than the last one. So 2 particular points I want to make. In Commission 2050, there was an importance of talking to children, and there is a section on children, I think it's 635, and I think it ties up really with what we've just all been talking about. There is, in the annual report, an ambition for all parts of Hampshire to be covered by local cycling and walking implementation plans within the next few years, and it's seeking to reduce car dependency. It's not actually saying it's reduced car dependency. I'm also just want to make a point that on the page, on the summary page about progress on engaging with Hampshire residents, it really doesn't showcase in any way engaging with children. And there's no evidence really on that, except on the pages on page 1060. There's a really clear message for children. And actually, I recently went to see a performance online, actually on film, where Wessex Dance met with the youth orchestra talking about the 1.5 degree rise in our seas and doing a dance and doing a composition to it. It was stunning and very innovative. And I really want to see a range of engagement seeking with families, not just with children at school. And I realise that the COVID pandemic made that difficult, but it would really be good to see a really positive progress on working with children. A child who's 11 now in 2021 will be 30 by 2040 and 40 by 2050. So between 30 and 40, it's probably the most economically active time of their lives. Winchester City Council, through it's the CSE, have provided a carbon footprint of our villages and town areas to inform local people about how they can make a difference. And the context of this is it's clear that the areas with the gold star for a lower carbon lifestyle is actually one of our most deprived areas. So the challenge for us is to enable and encourage the better off adult population, and our 11-year-olds will be that very active population, to learn lessons from the lower carbon lifestyle groups. They've got to learn to reduce their consumerism and reduce their travel, but still whilst keeping the economy of this county buoyant. So it's really important, I think, to really emphasise that education is for all of our young people, not just those in a number of schools, is a really critical part of this climate change agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Todd.
Thank you for the chance to say a few words today. As previously discussed at full council, there are a couple of things I want to touch on today. The first is the council strategy, the decisions made within it, whether it needs a clearer objective for recycling. And the second is the carbon change annual report. And the truth is they're quite linked, and they both suffer from the same flaw, which is a lack of clarity and ambition on sustainability and tackling the climate emergency. First of all, the strategies. Here's the old strategy, 2017 to 2021, and here's the new one. And in terms of the target outcomes, a few words have been added, and only one word has been removed. It used to be in outcome 1, it's the word sustainable. The word sustainable has been taken out of the council's strategy. And that tied to the point that I raised at full council about the need for a clearer ambition on recycling. Not just for carbon reasons, that's touched on in the carbon report, but also because of the circular economy and the other pressures that recycling has the potential to relieve on our planet. Let's be clear, the status quo, Hampshire's recycling rate, as published by DEFRA on March the 3rd, 2021, once again showed Hampshire with the worst recycling rate of any disposal authority county council and the second worst statistics for residual waste. And I realise that's a shared responsibility. Every single authority in Hampshire was reported as below average except for Hart. But only Hampshire is bottom of the table versus comparable authorities. And I realise at this point that I'm going to hear how great the household waste recycling centres are. But this report, the government's main report on recycling, doesn't report on household waste recycling centres. It reports on recycling and it reports on residual waste. And on both those metrics, Hampshire is unacceptably poor. It is a system problem, it is a joint problem, and it needs system leadership. And that's why I've been seeking for Hampshire to set itself a goal of breaking out of mediocrity and no longer being below average. All the authorities are going to have to change to fix that, but Hampshire needs to take a leadership role, not a passive role, and be in the situation of saying, oh, well, if only the districts collected more, because that's not acceptable and that's not leadership. And that ties into a wider theme, the need for carbon and sustainability goals to be more deeply embedded in the organisation. It's a climate change report, annual report, that doesn't just not report on progress against our carbon goals, but also doesn't report on the scale of progress on the different elements that will be needed to deliver our carbon goals. To be clear, there are a lot of good things in this report, a lot of good directions set, but what there isn't is commitments to pace and scale and ambition. There's not enough action, there's not enough speed, there's not enough ambition. It talks about active travel improvements, but let's be clear. Yes, in this year, we put in 40 active travel measures into 40 different places, and then we took 39 of them out again. We're talking about cutting bus services, not expanding them. Yes, there is a bus service improvement plan, but in the first year, we're talking about cutting services. The current budget cuts services. Where is the renewable energy generation? We've had sustainable in our council plan for 4 years. Why is it only now that we've commissioned Southampton to do a report to tell us how we can get into the space of renewable energy generation? 3% of our energy is generated in Hampshire. We should be already acting on our own land. And incidentally, a point in passing, that's one thing that isn't mentioned within the report. It's the one surprising gap, which is we own a lot of farms. I downloaded the council's property register to count how many there were. We talk about what we want to do to our own housing. We don't talk about agriculture, and we don't talk about what we do with our own land holdings, our own agricultural land holdings. So where is the renewable energy generation, or even the specific projects underway? And coming back to the earlier point, what's the goal for the recycling system? We talk about resilience, but in section 7.3, it says further work will be done to develop the programme to support this focus. This should already be underway. It's fine having plans and research projects, but we've had sustainable in our strategy for 4 years. We are way behind schedule. And what action there is too small scale. So one of the very few areas where we've actually set a goal which contributes towards the overall goal is trees. We've said we want to plant 1 million trees. And that's by 2050. That's 33,000 a year. How many have we planted? 1,351. It's less than Portsmouth. It's pretty close to being less than Winchester. It's nothing close to the scale of what's needed. There's reference in here to the solar PV offer. 0.2% of households have accepted the solar PV offer. We're not going to save the planet with 0.2% of households. 0.05% of houses have called the advice line. As mentioned, 3% of Hampshire's energy is generated locally. We talk about investing in the greening campaign. Now, the district I know, which is Winchester, the greening campaign has gone into Hambledon. It's less than 1% of the population of the district. So what are the plans? What is the plan to scale? How do we do something that achieves on the scale that we need? Incidentally, I don't want to get political, but the scale of online advertising that's happened to support our climate change campaign is smaller than the campaign I ran for my colleague for the Liberal Democrat Police and Crime Commissioner in Hampshire. That can't be right. That can't be serious. I hate to say it, but it's more important that we tackle the climate emergency than we had a Liberal Democrat as Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire. We talk about embedding change, but the test for this is go back and read the medium-term financial strategy documents and try and see how carbon influenced it. It's mentioned in passing, but it is not a driving force within how we think about the medium-term financial strategy. As said, we have a strategic plan from which we've removed the word sustainable. So what's needed and what I don't see is a scale and pace of change. What's needed is wider embedding of goals across all departments and all workflows that set interim ambitious goals to move ahead. There's a good example here where through the change in energy supplier and other measures, the council's own climate carbon emissions have, as it says, fallen by 21%. That's great. So why is the council's objective still 2050 to get to net zero carbon for itself? We need more ambition. We need more targets and scale to be driving change. There's a lot of narrative in here. There isn't a structured, prioritized approach that will deliver the speed of change that we need. And so while there's a lot in here to welcome, I think the challenge is to Cabinet to say, set the more ambitious goals, define the more ambitious timeline, provide the resources to make that possible, because as we all agreed 2 years ago, it is an emergency, and we need a plan that reflects that.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Right, well, to start our discussion on this particular item, Stuart, I know your officers are with you. Would you like to either start it yourself with answering the report or describing the report, or if you want to pass straight on to Chitra and James as well, if necessary?
Thank you very much, Leader. I will hand straight over to Chitra to introduce the report, and James and I are here to help with any questions if necessary.
Thank you, Chairman. So the purpose of the report is to provide Cabinet with the first update on our progress over the last 12 months since the climate change strategy was approved in July 2020. So the report sets out that progress, and it also sets out what we want to do for the second year of delivery, which is to focus more on resilience. So the annual report itself is in the appendix, along with a number of other attachments, which I will go through. So the report covers embedding climate change within the organisation, which is clearly quite a critical component of the work that we're doing, and that includes things like the procurement guidance, staff e-learning, and also the 2 decision tools that are now a mandatory part of all of our decision making. The annual report also covers the strategic framework. Now, this is probably the biggest part of the report, because this is where we cover the key areas where we know we need to make the biggest impact. So, for example, residential, transport, energy, natural environment. So those are all covered in quite a bit of detail within the report under the strategic framework. The report also gives an update on how we're working with networks and partnerships across Hampshire and wider in the region and nationally to ensure that we're working together to maximise our outputs. Also providing an update on communications and marketing. We understand that a lot of the work that we need to do is engaging with our residents, engaging with businesses, engaging with our partners to make things happen together. So this is quite a big part of the work that we do, and we've done a number of campaigns over the last year, including the most recent one on Swap On to Local. We've also got a really extensive climate change website, which we're using to communicate the work that we're doing and making sure that that's a one-stop shop for everything that we do. The progress report also covers an update on the action plan. This is the sort of 200 actions that are taking place across the authority to both reduce our carbon emissions and to build resilience across all of the key sectors. As I said, also included are 4 appendices. The first one is infographics. So these are really just easy to access snapshots of the progress that has been made in the key areas, particularly around the strategic framework. So there's one on transport, one on highways, one on environment, one on residential, one on energy and the green economy, and one on engaging with the residents. The annual report itself can be found in Appendix 2. Appendix 3 provides the more detailed update on the strategic framework line by line, and same with Appendix 4, that's the more detailed update on the action plan for each single action within that. There's a brief summary of the financial budget situation with the climate change work, just outlining what we have used the budget for today and what is remaining in the budget. And finally, the 2 final sections are really around performance, just to highlight that there has been considerable progress in the last year despite COVID, with some key projects sort of being delivered, including the Local Transport Plan 4, and a lot of substantial activity to embed in climate change across the County Council. Obviously, COVID has had an impact, so there are a number of actions within the action plan that have reported no progress, and that's been an acceptable outcome for this year, and we will obviously be pursuing that to make sure that there is progress next year. Some areas has actually gone a bit faster because of, say, digital enabled. COVID has kind of pushed some of that stuff faster this year, which is good news. And finally, just to recommend that the second year of delivery focuses on climate resilience. There's been a lot of stuff in the news around climate resilience and the fact that it's seen as the Cinderella to carbon emissions. We do have 2 targets, and that is quite unique, so we think it's a good opportunity for us to focus on resilience next year. And finally, just to say that the projects that are outlined in the report will be continuing to be delivered and obviously extended beyond where they're going now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chitral. Councillor Warwick.
Yes, thank you so much, Leader. If you like, if it's helpful, I could pick up on Councillor Todd referred to the strategic plan. If that would be helpful at this point, I can make some comments on that. And first of all, he referred to the differences between the Cabinet Covering Report and the Serving Hampshire Residents Strategic Plan 2021 to 2025 document. And we've been advised by officers that the wording of the strategic plan would take precedence, as this is the document recommended by Cabinet and approved by Council. And this, I believe, would cover the matters raised by Councillor Todd in relation to outcomes 3 and 4. Leader, in respect of the suggested change in addition to the wording for outcome 1 put forward also by Councillor Todd in relation to sustainability, and particularly to regard to waste and recycling, I would like to propose an amendment to the strategic plan, if you are agreed. I believe that this change would clarify the County Council's policy approach and reinforce our recognition of the importance of climate change and recycling, waste and recycling in this area. That Cabinet recognised the importance of waste minimisation through the promotion of the circular economy as a key element of the climate change strategy and the forthcoming Environment Bill, and accordingly recommends that County Council amend outcome 1 of the Serving Hampshire Residents Strategic Plan to reflect this. So the wording, Leader, I would propose under outcome 1 that Hampshire maintains a strong, resilient and sustainable, so the new word there is sustainable, put back in, economic growth and prosperity. And then we had 5 priorities, so I would like to add a 6th, if I may, which would be promoting the circular economy to minimise waste and use of natural resources. And Leader, that if I propose that, that would need a seconder. I understand that amendment is then taken from Cabinet to then the next full council in November.
I think I'm right in saying that's correct. It would need a seconder. Russell seconded that. So I'm happy to have that as a second recommendation on top of the one that we've already got here. I think I'm right in doing that, Barbara. And it's just a matter of getting the wording absolutely right.
Yeah. So we'll liaise with officers if you're happy. It's as I read out, Leader.
Yes. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. What we'll do is when we come to the end of the discussion, if you could read that out again, and then we've got it absolutely right. Kevin.
I can circulate a copy if that helps, Chairman.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Easy, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leader, if I may, I'd like to comment on this paper as well, unless you want to open that to other members first. I'm just very proud, thank you. This is a significant milestone, the annual climate report. It's a significant milestone for the County Council, and it demonstrates how much we've achieved over the last 12 months since we published our strategy back in July 2020, alongside the COVID pandemic, when we were all working not as usual. The work we undertook with the Carbon Trust was really critical in establishing not only our baseline emissions for the county area, but to help us develop 2 innovative decision-making tools, which are now a mandatory component of every decision we make in this council. It has been a key priority for us that climate change is embedded in absolutely everything we do, from waste to highways to adult social care, and across our schools and estates as well. They provide a robust and transparent check across all our key decisions, and they contribute to reducing the impacts and helping us be more resilient to climate change. Through our baseline emissions leader, we've recognized that significant work is going to be needed on key areas like transport, residential, our economy, environment, and our energy production. And this report highlights the progress we've made so far in the detailed appendices to the report. COVID, as we know, has had a huge impact on our economy, and we've moved quickly to understand how we can start to build a more equitable and sustainable economy in the future, working with our partnership with the New Economics Foundation. We know that we will have to continue to work in partnership. For example, through our expert forum, we have the great and good of Hampshire climate change, including members of the Youth Parliament, their leader. And they help us to prioritize the right things to do and to make sure we work together to maximize our joint impact. We also know that supporting residents to take action in their homes in their own ways and their communities is extremely important, which is why we have launched our 4 climate change community projects. The Greening Campaign, it's a grassroots campaign. It is taking root across the county in parishes where there's a huge interest in something tangible, where we can all make small changes to add up to a larger amount. Our Hampshire Solar Together project, our Community Energy South project, and our Environment Centre, which provide trusted advice to our residents. And unusual county initiatives that pop up, such as Walktober. Did you know that more than 50% of our children are now walking to school and not relying on school transport? We've been raising awareness and communicating with our residents. The Swap to One local that Chitra mentioned is great examples, taking a local holiday rather than one abroad. So I myself swapped New York for York. I'm not sure if that was a winner, but it was great. All sorts of things, backing our local shops, our community shops. If you could buy one item there locally rather than buying it at the supermarket, it all adds up. We're also launching today several new videos, sort of highlighting our projects, from the Greening Campaign to our parish pollinator strategy to our EV projects, to showcase the progress that's been made by this county council. And also at a good time as we raise awareness as we move towards COP26 at the beginning of November. But also I just want to say a very, very big thank you. I know despite what Councillor Todd has said, actually we have a small team. It's a bespoke team. It's a very good team. It's led by Chitra and Stuart. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to them for all the work they've done. I know Councillor Todd loves his targets and his scale and pace that wants to outpace the government. But I do challenge anyone here who's not a member of the Liberal Democrat Party to name the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Liberal Democrats, their candidate. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Warwick. Councillor Russell Oppenheimer.
Thank you, Leader. And I want to echo what Jan Warwick said. I think that the scale and the ambition in this report is formidable. I was really proud reading it at the way that every part of Hampshire County Council is taking action, whether it's the £80 million school solar and double glazing project, the country parks and the tree planting. And also I'd like to defend the Solar Together scheme that Councillor Todd tried to minimise. It's the first wave. There'll be second waves, third waves, and once the government's warmer homes strategy is out, I think we'll see a huge increase in take-up of that. So I was very proud, and I think the response from communities has been extraordinary in Hampshire. I would personally prefer if we didn't politicise climate issues. I think we need to be positive, we need to be proud of what we're doing, and that's the way to engage people. And if I can talk about highways for a second, I'm not aware of any highways department in the country that is doing what we're doing in Hampshire. It's in the report at paragraph 3.2.1, but just to draw out some of the highlights. We opened a recycling facility in Mitchell Dever where we are recycling asphalt. taking 40% of the carbon emissions out of the process, using a fifth of the energy of traditional asphalt. It's a very innovative facility. There's no other facility like it in the country. I've had calls from councillors across the UK asking me about it, and I've been very happy to put them in touch with our delivery partners, Milestone. So I think we can be proud of that. We're also switching to biofuels for all our fleet and electric vehicles where we can, and we think by 2025 we're on track to have our entire fleet using non-regular petrol and diesel. We're using battery-powered trimmers and strimmers that we've bought over the last 2 years for regular vegetation cutting, and we're retrofitting all our depots. But that's not all. I want to turn to resilience, which is obviously going to be the theme for the next year. The Highways Department is playing a crucial part in getting us ready for climate change. We saw flash floods over the summer, which I think most people in this room will acknowledge are linked to climate change. We've had 31 Operation Resilience schemes to improve drainage, and that meant that we were well prepared for the flash floods. We are now preparing for winter with 43 dedicated gritters and training and developing our HGV driver fleet so that we're very well prepared for any storms that might come. And as we know, these storms, the beast from the east storms that we saw 3 years ago, they are also linked to climate change. So I'm very proud of what we're doing in this county. I'm proud that this country is decarbonising faster than any other developed country in the world. And I think that we will continue to scale up and drive forward with our schemes across the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Any other, Edward?
Chairman, thank you. I did just want to mention, because Councillor Todd raised what we were doing with our rural estate, and I'm pleased he looked, but he could have looked a little harder, or he'd have found the policy that I adopted on the 19th of March that set out what we're doing in sustainability on our rural estate. And I think I'll pick one of them, and there is a whole section on this in there, but I'll pick one of them, and that is that we are requiring all our tenants to adopt an adaptive sustainable farming system that will help us meet our climate change targets. And we are working with all our existing and future tenants to ensure that we have that join up between sustainable, productive and innovative farming that ensures that we provide the food that we require as locally and sustainably as possible. And I would be more than happy to meet with Councillor Todd and talk him through all the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Edward. Councillor Reid, Steve Reid.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Oppenheimer referred to something that I wanted to talk about a little. Paragraph 3.2.2, the Mitchell Dever Recycling Facility. I do find that innovative. I'm not an expert, but recycling operations are formally commenced at the Mitchell Dever Recycling Facility, and that was from February 2021, so soon I'm sure we'll have some figures from it, taking old roads, crunching them up and putting them down as new roads. And that is going to save, I think I saw 67,500 kilograms of carbon dioxide usage. Now, I mean, this is good, and this is something that we could well speak of. And I wish in a way that Councillor Todd had picked out some of the positives from the report, because it is an extremely positive report, and I'm full of admiration for the work that Chitra is doing. But Councillor Todd's presentation to us reminded me of a Conservative Party conference in a way. A sure way of getting chosen to speak was to put in against the motion. And then the person would stand up and say, I agree with everything in this motion, it just doesn't go far enough, and then proceed to give his 4 minutes. It was a device. And I had to make a note when Councillor Todd was talking about his police and crime commissioner campaign for the Liberal Democrats. If anything proved what I keep saying, it is that you should measure an item not by its inputs, but by its outcomes. And Councillor Todd has given me a good example.
Thank you, Steve. Other comments at all from my Cabinet members? Yes, okay.
I just wanted to say that, you know, frankly, I felt that some of the things that Councillor Todd said were insulting to our officers and cabinet members, actually, just particularly Councillor Warwick, who puts in so much work. He talks about, the, you know, lack of speed, ambition and these things. We've made huge progress, as far as I can see in the report, with care homes, our residents, the children's work in schools, even our day services, I know, are doing good work. And my own division, we've got the greening campaign taking off, which is doing really well. I just wish that if Councillor Todd took a more grown-up approach to his comments, then we might take his scrutiny more seriously.
Any other comments at all? Well, we've got the recommendation in front of you on page 1003 and the additional recommendation which Councillor Warwick will now read out.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'll read out the full recommendation. That Cabinet recognise the importance of waste minimisation through promotion of the circular economy as a key element of the climate change strategy, and accordingly recommends that County Council amend Outcome 1 of the Serving Hampshire Residents Strategic Plan 2021 to 2025 to reflect this, as detailed in the extract from the strategic plan attached to this decision record and shown below. Outcome 1, Hampshire maintains strong, resilient and sustainable economic growth and prosperity. Our priorities are promoting a green economic recovery across Hampshire, ensuring Hampshire has the right conditions for economic innovation to flourish, enhancing our competitiveness as an international gateway and globally connected economy, maximising opportunities for employment and inclusion by equipping people with the right skills to support and benefit from economic growth, promoting Hampshire's assets and opportunities as an excellent place to work, visit, live and do business, and finally promoting the circular economy to minimise waste and use of natural resources. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Warwick. Are you happy with those two recommendations? Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, New Forest National Park Authority Management Plan. Who's leading on that? Is it, yes.
Thank you, Leader. This paper is seeking the Council's endorsement for the new Forest National Park Management Plan. This is a revised and updated management plan for the period of 2021 to 2026. It refreshes the vision for the forest and renews the commitments to the national parks to purposes and duty. The plan is orientated around 5 theme-based agendas for action, highlighting areas where collaboration can affect transformative change, using collaboration between local communities, volunteers, local authorities, businesses, and generally all the sort of the invested parties in the forest area. This management plan supports the Council's own strategic direction objectives, and there are no additional financial impacts as a result on the Council as a result of this, because our activities are in line with our own objectives and business as usual. And I therefore recommend this paper to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, James. Comments? Edward, have you got anything to add to that at all?
Chairman, I don't. Or I would say I think there was an extensive consultation, and I would urge again members to look at the plan and the section in there on climate change and nature recovery, and again see how that shows that we're working together to improve the environment across our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Are you happy with the recommendation on page 1115? All in favour? Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I speak in my role as guardian of transparency and democratic accountability from the opposition benches on this item. And I very much hope that Cabinet will reject the recommendations that are in front of it on this paper, because they fail to meet the test of transparency and they fail to meet the test of democratic accountability, because they reduce both. The guise that's been put forward here is this is business efficiency, and well, we're just putting these figures up in line with inflation. Well, it may well be business efficient, but it would be business efficient to have all meetings behind closed doors with no public attendance, no advertising, and everything just been done in private and confidential with no transparency and no accountability. So that disposes of the business efficiency angle. The inflation angle is simply wrong. It's basic maths. Now, I did a bit of work looking at the Bank of England indices for inflation since 2001 and since 2007, which are the dates that are referenced in this paper. Inflation since 2001 is 71%. I'm sure Rob will correct that, but I'm sure the Bank of England got it right. That would suggest that when the figure was increased from 500,000 in 2001, it should not have gone, even today, to beyond 855,000, looking at recommendation 1. If we look at inflation from 2007 to 2021, just to be really generous and to give you a chance, well, inflation since 2007 is 44%, according to the Bank of England, which suggests that instead of increasing the financial threshold for key decisions to 2 million, it should go up to 1.4 million and a bit. So what's really happening here is Cabinet is being recommended to take more decisions away from more open scrutiny and accountability. That can't be right. I urge Cabinet to reject these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor House.
I think Barbara's going to walk us through this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the report contains a number of proposals excuse me, aimed at increasing business efficiency and making our business arrangements more agile, freeing up some of our processes and in effect harvesting the lessons learned from COVID. Briefly, Chairman, there's 3 sections in the report. Firstly, the report recommends that the present financial threshold aspect of a key decision be reviewed. It's presently £1 million as set out in the report, and it's proposed that this be increased to £2 million. The threshold set is a matter for the County Council, and as Councillor House has said, the present threshold of 1 million was set 14 to nearly 15 years ago in 2007. Clearly, what was significant in terms of the County Council's budget for a service or area to which a decision relates is different now in 2021 to what it was in 2007. I should point out, and I think this will hopefully answer Councillor House's point, is that there's 2 thresholds for a key decision, and the second limb of a key decision, where it's considered that the decision is significant in terms of its effects on communities living or working in 2 or more divisions, that decision would remain key, whatever the financial value of the decision. And Chairman, a decision could be of no enormous consequence at all in terms of being a key decision when the second threshold is engaged. It's not a case of either, it has to be both, it's a case of either or, and quite often there are key decisions which are under the £1 million threshold, but where the second limb of the decision would be engaged, and looking forward if the financial threshold was increased, where if a decision was caught by the second limb, i.e. being significant in terms of effects on 2 or more divisions, then it would still remain a key decision, whatever the financial limit of it. Members, Chairman, linked to these initiatives are a number of changes proposed to contract standing orders, in particular contract standing orders 9 and 12, which deal with tendering procedures and waiver, and a number of consequential changes to other contract standing orders as outlined in the report. It's proposed that the thresholds for waiver or single tender approvals, as they're known, be reviewed so that they're more in line with the now UK thresholds, and so that any waiver follows the decision maker, thus having the business benefit of removing the additional step of seeking executive member approval to a single tender where a routine contract, where the value is above the threshold for key decision, and there would be a saving in business efficiencies, there reflecting the need for agility and aligning the decision maker in relation to spend while retaining appropriate governance arrangements. The third and final section of the report contains the proposal that the thresholds for capital spend be also be reviewed, given the scale of the County Council's capital programme. As with the case of the thresholds for key decision, capital spend approval thresholds haven't been reviewed for some time, in this case 2015. What this would mean in practice is that provided any additions or environments are in line with approved County Council policies and strategies, approval limits for chief officers in consultation with executive members, individual executive members themselves and Cabinet would be roughly doubled, but the requirement for the County Council to approve schemes over £2 million would remain unchanged. And Chairman, that's all I propose to say unless Cabinet have got any comments.
Thank you, Barbara. Colleagues? Steve?
Yeah, I was a little puzzled by Councillor House criticising us for upping these limits because it's greater than inflation. Because reading the report quickly through again, I didn't find that justification being used by the officers, that it was meant to be a direct inflation link. The justifications that I saw most powerfully were that it would make for swifter decision making and agility in terms of the 28-day period. Now, if I've misread the report, I would stand to be corrected, but I think here we're making a business decision and the prize is agility. And I see Barbara nodding her head. So if I got that wrong, please correct me, but I think I've got it right.
Any other comments? Oh, sorry, it's the other Steve Forster.
Thank you. Yes, just to reiterate the previous comments and the point that Barbara made, part of the reason for raising these is based on lessons learnt. It's very sad that someone's arguing against lessons learnt. I wholeheartedly endorse this report.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Well, I think all I'd add in answer to Councillor House is there's obviously a balance between democratic accountability and business efficiency. And I have to say that local government generally is probably, yes, very democratically accountable for the things we're responsible for, but I don't know whether we're always top of the game when it comes to business efficiency, and it's the balance that's important. I'd also add that if a member of the Cabinet has a concern about a particular matter that can be decided by officers, they have a right to actually say so and to do something about it. I'd use the analogy of a planning application where a parish council can effectively, if they answer the inquiry properly, get to be looked at by the committee responsible at district or area, depending upon the part of the county you live in. And this is similar, really. You still have the option as a cabinet member of actually looking more closely at decisions that have the officers have the delegated responsibility for them. But if you think they are something that is important, you can certainly do that. In other words, there's a relationship there. So I think this democratic accountability is still there, but we probably have to disagree on whether, in fact, it should be the primary concern in this case rather than business efficiency. Personally, I think the rules, as we're suggesting we change them, have got it about right. So if everyone else, no one else wants to speak, can we agree the recommendations on page 1123 and following?